My name is Audrey, 34 years old, and today I watched my greedy in-laws seal their own fate. At my stepson's promotion ceremony, my 9-year-old son Leo squeezed my hand so hard his knuckles turned white. "Mom, can we leave?" he whispered. I asked him why, but he shook his head. Not until we were speeding away from the country club did he finally speak. "Mom, you did not see what Grandma did you?" My blood ran cold as he explained that my mother-in-law had just stolen my encrypted USB drive. I spent my marriage playing the role of a quiet bookkeeper, letting my husband and his elite family treat me like an unwanted accessory. But they had no idea that I was actually a lead forensic financial investigator, and that drive contained a federal probe into their company. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who grossly underestimated your worth. The evening began at the Oak Ridge Country Club, a place dripping with old money and new arrogance. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, intercepted me and Leo the moment we walked through the grand double doors. She wore a silk gown that probably cost more than my supposed monthly salary. Beatrice gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and steered us away from the main dining area. "You two will be sitting back here," she announced, pointing to a tiny wobbly table right next to the swinging kitchen doors. "The main tables are reserved for real family and executives. Connor cannot have a mousy bookkeeper and a noisy child ruining his promotion photos." I looked at the beautifully decorated tables in the center of the room adorned with towering floral centerpieces and crystal glasses. My stepson Connor had just been named a vice president at the family firm, a title he earned entirely through nepotism. I pulled out a chair for Leo, who looked down at his shoes. I took a deep breath, deciding not to cause a scene for my son's sake. Just then, my husband Richard strolled past our table. He was adjusting his expensive silk tie, smelling of scotch and expensive cologne. "Richard," we said, standing up, "your mother just placed us by the kitchen. Are you going to say something?" Richard sighed, looking at me with pure exhaustion, as if my very existence was a burden. "Audrey, please do not do this tonight," he muttered, looking around to see if anyone was watching us. "Stay put. Do not embarrass Connor on his big day. This is a high-level corporate event, and you just do not fit the aesthetic. Grab a bread roll and keep the kid quiet." He turned on his heel and walked away to join his mother and Connor at the head table, laughing loudly and aggressively, clapping his son on the back as if they were the masters of the universe. I sat back down in the unstable chair, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached from the sheer disrespect they displayed. A waiter approached our table a few minutes later. "We are out of the prime rib," he informed me. "You will have to settle for the vegetarian pasta." My patience evaporated. I leaned forward, looking him dead in the eyes. "I transferred the $20,000 deposit for this entire event from my personal account yesterday," I said, keeping my voice razor sharp. "So you will go back to the kitchen and bring my son the prime rib I paid for, or I will dispute the charge before dessert." The waiter turned pale, stammered an apology, and ran back through the swinging doors. Richard had claimed his assets were tied up in a corporate restructuring, begging me to cover the venue cost. He thought I used my life savings. He had no idea my actual income was well into the six figures earned tracking financial criminals. I let them believe I was a nobody to protect myself. The rest of the night dragged on. We endured the endless speeches praising Connor for his non-existent business acumen. Beatrice paraded around the room, taking credit for her grandson's success. I kept a low profile, eating my prime rib and playing games on my phone with Leo. When the cake was finally cut, I grabbed my purse and signaled to Leo that it was time to escape. We slipped out the back door without saying goodbye to anyone. The crisp night air felt amazing after hours of suffocating family drama. We got into my car, and I quickly merged onto the highway, eager to put the country club miles behind us. That was when Leo finally broke his silence. He looked at me from the passenger seat, his eyes wide with fear. "Mom, you did not see what Grandma did you?" he whispered. My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about, buddy?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. "Grandma Beatrice," he stammered. "When you went to the bathroom, she came over to our table. She opened your purse and took something out. I slammed my right foot on the brakes, pulling the car onto the shoulder of the empty highway. My heart pounded against my ribs. I grabbed my purse from the center console and ripped the zipper open. I frantically tore through my wallet, my house keys, my small makeup pouch. My hands started to shake uncontrollably. The hidden, specially designed compartment inside the deep lining of my bag was completely unzipped and totally empty. My biometric encrypted USB drive was gone. It did not hold simple family photos or boring tax returns. That small drive contained a highly sensitive multi-million-dollar federal investigation into a massive Wall Street money laundering ring, and my mother-in-law had just stolen it. I whipped the steering wheel hard to the left and forced the heavy SUV across the highway median. The tires screeched against the pavement as I accelerated back toward the Oak Ridge Country Club. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly my joints ached. I glanced in the rearview mirror at Leo. He looked absolutely terrified, his small hands clutching his seatbelt. I told him everything was going to be fine, but my voice betrayed a sharp edge of panic. That missing USB drive was not a normal storage device holding family photos or tax returns. It was federal property. It contained highly classified financial profiles and tracking protocols for a massive Wall Street money laundering ring, and my arrogant mother-in-law had just waltzed off with it. I pulled into the parking lot and jammed the car into park. I told Leo to lock the doors and not open them for anyone. I promised I would be right back. I sprinted toward the grand entrance of the clubhouse, the gravel crunching under my heels. Before I could reach the heavy glass doors, two figures stepped out from the shadows of the portico, completely blocking my path. It was my brother-in-law Isaiah and his wife Stephanie. Isaiah stood tall, wearing an obnoxiously tight-tailored suit that he thought made him look like a young billionaire. He crossed his arms over his chest, making sure the lobby lights caught the face of his massive gold watch. I knew for a fact it was a fake Rolex he bought online, but Isaiah played the role of a wealthy cryptocurrency genius to the hilt. "Where is the fire, bookkeeper?" Isaiah asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You look like you just lost a winning lottery ticket." I demanded they move out of my way, explaining quickly that Beatrice had taken something from my purse. Isaiah let out a loud laugh that echoed across the quiet courtyard. He held up his wrist, checking his fake watch again with a theatrical sigh. "Are you having a full-blown panic attack over a cheap flash drive?" he asked, shaking his head in mock pity. "Audrey, people like you who punch calculators for pennies should not make a scene at high society events. It is embarrassing for all of us. You are embarrassing yourself and Richard." He smirked, thoroughly enjoying his own cruel performance. Stephanie stepped forward. Her expression twisted into a nasty sneer. She had always hated me, viewing my quiet demeanor as a weakness to be endlessly exploited. "You are completely delusional, Audrey." Stephanie spat, crossing her arms over her designer gown. "Mom did not take anything from your purse. You are just a bitter stepmother who cannot stand to see Connor succeed. You have always hated that my brother has a son who is going places while you are stuck balancing spreadsheets for minimum wage." I stared at her, amazed by her aggressive ignorance. I had spent the last 5 years listening to this entire family mock my supposed low-income job, completely unaware that I could freeze their entire financial existence with a single phone call to my agency directors. But I did not have time to educate her tonight. I tried to step around them, but Stephanie shifted her weight, deliberately blocking me again. "You are not going back inside to ruin the rest of the night," Stephanie commanded. "In fact, the general manager just handed me the final bill for the reserve wine Connor ordered for his friends. It is exactly $5,000. Since Richard is currently tied up entertaining actual important guests, you need to go settle it immediately. We are done paying for your lack of class." I just stared at the leather folder she shoved into my chest. $5,000 for wine my stepson ordered just to show off to his wealthy friends, completely expecting me to foot the bill. I threw the folder onto the hard ground at Stephanie's feet. "Pay it with your fake crypto money," I said, looking directly at Isaiah. I shoved past them, ignoring Stephanie's outraged gasp and Isaiah's angry protests. I knew Beatrice had likely already left the building with my device, but I needed Richard's corporate credit card to at least settle the accounts and officially sever my liability for the night before I tracked the drive down. I marched away from the main clubhouse and headed straight toward the secluded VIP parking lot where Richard always insisted on parking his luxury sedan. The night air was thick with summer humidity, and the sound of crickets hummed loudly in the manicured bushes. I wove through the neat rows of expensive vehicles, scanning the dark lot for Richard's custom license plate. I needed to find him fast before the situation spiraled completely out of my control. I turned the corner past a massive decorative hedge and spotted his sleek black Mercedes parked under a flickering security light. I started walking toward it, pulling my keys from my pocket so I could confront him. But as I got closer, I stopped dead in my tracks. My stomach dropped violently. Richard was not inside entertaining important guests like his sister claimed. He was pinned heavily against the driver's side door of his car, his hands roaming wildly over the back of a woman wearing a tight red cocktail dress. It was Sydney, his 24-year-old executive assistant. They were locked in a passionate, desperate kiss, completely oblivious to the world around them. I stood frozen in the shadows of the VIP lot, my mind racing as the pieces fell into place. Within the span of a single hour, my mother-in-law had stolen classified federal evidence. My sister-in-law had demanded I pay for their extravagant lifestyle, and my husband was actively betraying me. I took a slow breath, letting the shocking reality wash over me, knowing exactly what I had to do next. I stepped out from the shadows of the massive hedge, my block heels striking the asphalt with deliberate force. The sharp sound echoed through the humid air, cutting straight through the heavy silence of the VIP lot. Richard jumped back, startled. He practically shoved Sydney away from him. The executive assistant stumbled against the sleek black door of the Mercedes, quickly pulling down the hem of her tight red dress. Richard wiped a smear of gloss from his mouth. I expected him to look panicked, or perhaps ashamed. Instead, his features twisted into a mask of deep irritation. "What are you doing creeping around like a stalker, Audrey?" he demanded, aggressively straightening his suit jacket. I stood my ground, my hands resting calmly at my sides. "I came out here to find my husband," I replied, keeping my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I came for your credit card to pay the $5,000 wine tab your sister just handed me, but your assets seem tied up elsewhere tonight." Sydney let out a nervous giggle and scurried around the front of the car, disappearing without a backward glance. Richard ran a hand through his hair and took a step toward me in an attempt to intimidate me. "Do not start with your hysterical paranoia," he snapped, pointing a finger at my chest. Sydney was just comforting me. "Do you know how stressful this week has been for me?" "Of course you do not. You are completely checked out of this marriage. You are cold, unsupportive, and you constantly alienate my family. If you actually acted like a real wife, I would not need comfort from my staff." The sheer audacity of his gaslighting washed over me, but it did not leave a mark. He was standing there, wiping his mistress's lipstick off his chin, blaming me for his infidelity. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not ask him how long it had been going on, or why he was tearing our family apart. I just looked at him, feeling an overwhelming sense of icy clarity. "Your mother stole something from my purse tonight," I said, maintaining absolute eye contact. "I need you to go back inside and retrieve it right now." Richard threw his head back and let out a cruel, mocking laugh. "Listen to yourself, Audrey. You are entirely delusional. My mother did not steal your cheap flash drive. Why would she want anything belonging to you? You are obsessed with this victim narrative. You are ruining Connor's promotion day because my son is already more successful than you will ever be." He stepped closer, lowering his voice into a vicious sneer. "You expect me to hand over my credit card to pay a bar tab? Figure it out yourself. Use your measly bookkeeping salary. You sit in a cubicle and punch numbers all day for pennies, contributing nothing to our wealth. The least you can do is manage a simple wine bill without throwing a tantrum. You are a financial burden, Audrey. You drain my resources and you bring zero value to the family table. Grow up and handle it." I stared at the man I had married 5 years ago. He genuinely believed every word he just said. He actually believed he was the primary breadwinner carrying me through life. He had completely forgotten that I used my premarital assets to fund our down payment. He remained blissfully unaware that my supposed low-level bookkeeping job was actually a cover for my position as a lead forensic financial investigator. My annual salary tripled his, but I kept my wealth separate to maintain my cover and protect my son. "Keep your card." "Richard," I said quietly. I turned my back on him while he was still gearing up for another insult. "Where do you think you are going?" he shouted after me. "Get back inside and pay that bill." I ignored him, walking briskly across the asphalt toward my own SUV. The humid summer air clung to my skin, but inside my chest, everything was cold. The marriage was over. That realization did not break my heart. It liberated me. My only priority now was Leo and securing the classified federal evidence Beatrice had stolen. I reached my vehicle and unlocked the doors. Leo was sitting safely in the passenger seat, his eyes glued to a game on his tablet. He looked up at me nervously as I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors behind us. "Did you find Grandma?" Leo asked softly. "Not yet, buddy," I replied, offering him a reassuring smile. "But I know exactly how to find her." I reached under my seat and pulled out a heavy, matte black Panasonic Toughbook. It was a rugged government-issued terminal. I powered the machine on and placed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The system verified my print, and a secure command prompt filled the dark screen. I typed in a master override code, my fingers flying across the keys with practiced precision. The USB drive Beatrice had taken was not a simple storage device holding tax returns. It was a highly sophisticated federal honeypot tracker. The moment anyone plugged that drive into a computer, it would deploy a silent beacon bypassing all local network security and broadcasting a continuous geolocation signal directly to my encrypted server. I hit the enter key and a detailed digital map of the city materialized on my screen. I held my breath, waiting for the satellite handshake to complete. A bright red dot suddenly appeared on the digital grid, pulsing steadily against the dark background. I zoomed in on the coordinates, cross-referencing the address with the family records I knew by heart. The blinking red dot was not located at the country club. It was not at Beatrice's sprawling estate. The signal was pinging directly from a high-rise building downtown. It was plugged right inside Isaiah and Stephanie's luxury condo. Morning sunlight poured into my kitchen, casting long shadows across the marble island. I had not slept. My secure terminal remained open, displaying the red beacon confirming my stolen federal drive was plugged into a port at Isaiah and Stephanie's luxury condominium. They were attempting to crack a biometric encryption that was actively cataloging their entire digital footprint. I was reviewing the preliminary data extraction when the garage door slammed shut. Richard stormed inside. He was not wearing his tailored suit, but a casual polo, looking every bit the entitled executive heading out for a weekend retreat. He slung a monogrammed leather duffel bag onto the granite countertop, knocking my coffee mug aside. He did not apologize for arriving home at 7 in the morning after I caught him kissing his assistant in the country club parking lot. He simply tapped his phone screen and looked at me with pure arrogance. "Audrey, pull up the banking app right now," Richard commanded, his tone brisk and devoid of warmth. "I need you to transfer $50,000 from the joint savings into my checking account. Select the expedited wire option. I want it cleared by noon." I slowly closed my laptop, the soft click echoing in the tense silence. I looked up at him, my expression completely neutral. "I am sorry," I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. "You want me to wire you $50,000 after last night?" Richard let out a harsh, exasperated sigh, rolling his eyes, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Are we really going to do this right now?" he snapped, resting his hands on his hips. "I already told you yesterday Sydney was just comforting me. You are making a massive issue out of nothing. I have a corporate retreat this weekend, and I do not have time to soothe your fragile ego. Connor just made vice president. He needs a car that reflects his new status. I am buying him a Porsche Carrera this afternoon. Wire the money, Audrey, now." I remained seated, refusing to break eye contact. "No," I replied simply. "I will not be transferring a single dime to fund a luxury sports car for a boy who treats me like garbage, and I will certainly not be funding your hero complex." Richard slammed his fist against the marble island. The sudden noise was meant to intimidate me, to force me into the submissive role I had played flawlessly for the past 5 years. "You do not get to say no," he shouted, his face turning a mottled shade of crimson. "That is my money. I earned it. I run a multi-million-dollar division while you sit in a gray cubicle punching a calculator for pennies. You are my wife, Audrey, not my financial advisor. Do your job and authorize the transfer." I stood up slowly, matching his aggressive posture without raising my voice a single decibel. "Your money?" I asked, taking a step toward him. "That joint savings account currently holds $300,000. Do you want to know exactly how much of that is your corporate wealth, Richard? Less than 10%. The rest of that balance exists entirely because I sold my premarital condo 3 years ago. I deposited that money because you claimed your company was going through a temporary liquidity crisis, and you needed a safety net." Richard scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "That was a strategic marital investment. We are a team. My corporate bonuses pay for this house. They pay for your comfortable little life." I stared at him, marveling at the sheer magnitude of his delusion. Over the past 5 years, I had watched him drain every spare dollar we generated to fund his country club memberships and expensive dinners. He believed his status as a junior executive was the engine of our household, completely blind to the reality that my silent 6-figure salary from the federal government was the only thing keeping us afloat. He was a parasite, treating me like an annoying dependent. "You are not buying Connor a Porsche with the proceeds from my condo," I stated, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "Not today, not ever. I am freezing that account until we have a legal mediator sort out this marriage." Richard looked at me, a slow, malicious smile spreading across his face. It was the smile of a predator who believed he had already won the game. "You are going to freeze the account?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "Go ahead, Audrey. Pull up the app. Freeze it. Let us see." A sharp spike of adrenaline pierced through my chest. His confidence was entirely too steady. I broke eye contact and reached for my phone resting on the counter. I unlocked the screen with my fingerprint and opened our primary banking application. The dashboard materialized on the bright display, and my breath caught in my throat. I blinked, assuming there was a network error or a glitch in the interface, but the numbers remained glaringly, undeniably clear in bold black font. "Available balance, $0.00." I scrolled down frantically to the recent transaction history. At 2 in the morning, while I was tracking my stolen federal device, an expedited outgoing wire transfer had been initiated. $300,000 had been moved out of our joint savings and routed directly into a private, untraceable offshore account under Richard's sole name. He had not stormed into the kitchen to demand $50,000. He had manufactured this entire aggressive argument as a smokescreen to make me feel small and powerless, all while knowing he had already robbed me blind. I looked up. Richard had already zipped his designer duffel bag and hoisted it over his shoulder. "I told you yesterday not to test me," he sneered, turning toward the garage door. "Have a nice weekend, Audrey. Try not to go broke." The door slammed shut. The heavy thud of the garage door closing echoed through the empty kitchen, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. I did not collapse onto the marble island. I did not scream or cry over the missing $300,000. My forensic training had conditioned me to separate emotion from protocol. Richard had escalated from infidelity to grand larceny, and he had done it under the direct influence of his mother. I picked up my phone from the counter, my thumb hovering over the keypad. I bypassed Richard's number entirely and dialed Beatrice. She was the architect of this family's toxic dynamic, and I knew exactly who held the strings. The line rang twice before clicking open. The unmistakable sound of clinking crystal glasses and Stephanie's shrill, mocking laughter filled the background. They were already celebrating. Beatrice answered, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, amplified through a speakerphone. Audrey. What a surprise, Beatrice chimed, though she sounded entirely unsurprised. We are having a lovely morning mimosa right now at Stephanie's condo. I assume you are calling to apologize for your atrocious behavior at the country club last night. I ignored her patronizing tone, focusing entirely on the objective. Where is the money, Beatrice? Tell me now. I demanded, my voice razor-sharp and perfectly steady. $300,000 was wired out of my joint account at 2 in the morning. Stephanie let out a loud, obnoxious snort in the background. She is actually asking about the money, Mom, Stephanie sneered. I told you she would throw a fit. Beatrice tutted softly into the receiver, sounding like a disappointed schoolteacher scolding a slow student. Oh, Audrey, please stop being so dramatic. Beatrice sighed. Richard transferred that money under my direct advice. Consider it rightful compensation for your complete failure to support this family. You humiliated us last night. You refused to pay Connor's wine bill, you caused a scene in the parking lot, and you have consistently been a terrible, unsupportive wife. My son deserves that financial cushion for dealing with your cold, calculating personality. I leaned against the granite counter, gripping the edge. You advised him to steal my premarital assets, I asked, ensuring I got the admission clearly on the record. It is not stealing, Audrey, Beatrice snapped, dropping the sweet facade. When you marry into the Wilson family, your assets become our assets. A true family member would have handed over that condo money to support the family business the day the check cleared. Instead, you hoarded it in a joint account, forcing my son to beg for scraps, while you contributed absolutely nothing of value. You kept secrets. You acted like you were better than us. We simply took back what Richard was owed for his 5 years of misery. I listened to her unhinged justification, marveling at the depth of their collective delusion. They had bled me dry for half a decade, and in their twisted minds, I was the villain for not handing over the knife. You have absolutely no idea what you have just done to yourself, I stated, my tone dropping to a deadly calm. That money is the least of your problems right now. I need the encrypted drive you stole from my purse last night. I need it back immediately. Stephanie laughed again, a harsh grating sound that grated against my ears. Beatrice chuckled right along with her. You really think we are that stupid? Audrey, Beatrice asked, her voice dripping with triumph. Did you honestly believe we would not figure it out? We know exactly what that little device is. You have been walking around with a biometric lockbox, pretending to be a lowly bookkeeper. We know you have been hiding a secret offshore slush fund from us. My jaw clenched. A slush fund, I repeated, genuinely stunned by their sheer ignorance. Yes, a slush fund, Beatrice declared proudly. I saw you using it last month. Heavy biometric security, 0 brand markings. It is obvious. You have been siphoning money from our family and hiding it in some digital vault. So I took it. I handed it straight to Isaiah the moment we left the club. He knows exactly how to handle sneaky, deceitful women like you. There was a shuffling sound on the other end of the line, and then a deep, arrogant voice took over the speaker. Isaiah had entered the chat. What is up, bookkeeper? Isaiah taunted, his voice booming with misplaced confidence. Looking for your little secret stash. I stood perfectly still, my eyes locking onto my open laptop screen, across the kitchen where the red tracking beacon was still pulsing steadily from their exact location. Isaiah, do not plug that drive into anything, I warned him, keeping my voice flat. You are making a catastrophic mistake. Isaiah let out a booming laugh. Stop trying to scare me, Audrey. You are dealing with a crypto genius. I know a hardware wallet when I see one. You thought you could hide millions in Bitcoin from this family. My boys and I are already on it. I have 3 of my best crypto hacker friends working remotely on the terminal right now. We are bypassing your pathetic biometric lock as we speak. We are going to drain your little slush fund just like Richard drained your bank account. The room felt suddenly very cold. Isaiah, a man who bought fake gold watches online, had just hired amateur hackers to brute force a Class 1 federal encryption drive. They were not hacking a crypto wallet. They were actively triggering a massive cyber breach alarm at the headquarters of a federal intelligence agency. "Say goodbye to your little secret stash," Audrey Isaiah boasted, his voice thick with unearned victory. I did not argue. I did not warn them again. I simply tapped the screen and hung up the phone. I looked at the red blinking dot on my terminal, and a terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. I dropped my phone onto the cold marble countertop. The kitchen was completely silent, but my mind was moving at lightning speed. Isaiah actually believed he had the upper hand. He thought his amateur hacker friends were breaking into a hidden offshore bank account. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed a lead federal investigator the keys to his entire digital kingdom. I picked up my rugged Panasonic Toughbook and carried it into my home office. I locked the solid oak door behind me and settled into my leather chair. I connected the laptop to my secure multiple-screen command center and cracked my knuckles. It was time to go to work. The red tracking beacon on my primary screen was still blinking steadily from Isaiah and Stephanie's luxury condominium. Beneath the map, a rapid stream of code began scrolling down a black terminal window. Isaiah's hired friends were running a standard brute force attack against the biometric encryption on my USB drive. They were using cheap, basic retail software, throwing thousands of password combinations at the firewall every second. It was painfully amateurish, but it was exactly what I needed them to do. I typed a 12-character command string and hit enter. I activated the reverse shell protocol embedded deep within the architecture of the drive. The moment their software struck the secondary firewall, the trap snapped shut. My USB drive did not lock them out. Instead, it opened a massive, invisible backdoor directly into their local network. My screens lit up as my federal servers flooded through the breach. Within 30 seconds, I had unrestricted complete admin access to Isaiah's home network. I bypassed his router, hijacked his administrative privileges, and linked directly into his personal computer. But the reverse shell protocol did not stop there. Isaiah was carelessly connected to the Wilson Family Company's virtual private network. My protocol rode that connection straight past their corporate firewalls and embedded itself into the company's primary mainframes. I now possessed full administrative control over the entire Wilson corporate empire. I initiated a massive data extraction targeting their financial ledgers, internal communications, and banking records. A progress bar appeared on my screen, estimating a 10-minute download time. While the corporate servers bled their secrets into my encrypted vault, I started digging through the local files pulled from Isaiah's personal network. He was the family's so-called wealth manager, handling the private accounts for Beatrice and Richard. I opened a folder labeled with my son's name. It was Leo's college trust fund. Richard had always insisted on managing the account, claiming his lucrative stock investments would guarantee Leo a fully funded education. I clicked on the most recent banking statement, expecting to see the $80,000 we had painstakingly saved since Leo was born. The balance read $412. My eyes darted across the transaction history. For the past 3 years, Richard and Beatrice had been systematically siphoning money out of my son's future. There were dozens of wire transfers moving cash from the trust fund into Beatrice's personal checking account to cover her extravagant country club fees and luxury vacations. Richard had authorized every single withdrawal, draining his own child's educational future to fund his mother's superficial lifestyle and his own pathetic attempts to look wealthy. A wave of burning cold anger washed over me. They had not just stolen my condo money. They had robbed a 9-year-old boy. I did not cry. Crying was a useless emotion, and these people did not deserve my tears. They strictly deserved absolute financial annihilation, and I was going to deliver it. A sharp chime echoed from my computer speakers. The corporate data extraction was complete. 50 terabytes of highly sensitive proprietary information now sat securely on my hard drive. I opened the master financial ledger for Wilson Manufacturing. For years, Beatrice and Richard had paraded around town, acting like untouchable billionaires. They hosted charity galas, drove imported sports cars, and treated everyone else like dirt beneath their expensive shoes. They had convinced the entire city that they were old money royalty. I scrolled down to the bottom line of the master spreadsheet. The numbers painted a completely different picture. The Wilson family empire was not worth billions. It was not even worth millions. The company was currently operating at a staggering $150 million deficit. They were completely insolvent. I opened a subfolder labeled Highly Confidential and found a series of urgent legal notices. The IRS had initiated a massive, multi-agency audit into the company's accounting practices. Beatrice had been dodging federal tax payments for almost a decade, shifting toxic debt between shell companies to make the main corporation look profitable. They were sinking fast, and the walls were closing in on them. I kept digging, clicking through Richard's recent email correspondence with a desperate private corporate lender. Richard was frantically attempting to secure a $5 million bridge loan to keep the company afloat for another quarter. I opened the loan application attachment. My heart stopped. The collateral listed for the $5 million loan was my premarital home. Richard had submitted the deed to the property I owned outright before we were married. I scrolled down to the final page of the document. There, sitting starkly against the white digital paper, was my signature. It was a flawless forgery, signed and dated 2 days ago. They had not just stolen my cash and my son's college fund. They were actively preparing to leverage my personal house to cover their massive corporate debt, a move that would leave me homeless and bankrupt when their company inevitably collapsed. I stared at the forged signature, my mind processing the sheer magnitude of their betrayal. They had underestimated me at every single turn. They thought I was just a naive bookkeeper they could use and discard. Tomorrow they would learn exactly what happens when you cross a federal investigator. The summons arrived just before noon the next day, right on schedule. My phone vibrated on the desk with a text from Beatrice dictating my mandatory attendance at a family dinner that evening. She framed it as a gracious opportunity to resolve our recent misunderstandings and move forward as a united front. I knew exactly what it was. It was a firing squad. They needed my verbal compliance to push their fraudulent bridge loan through the final stages of approval. I spent the afternoon finalizing my data extraction and backing up every shred of their financial felonies to my secure agency servers. I arranged for Leo to spend the night at my director's heavily guarded suburban home, ensuring my son was completely insulated from the fallout. I changed into a sharp, tailored suit, strapped my encrypted phone to my wrist, and drove toward Beatrice's sprawling estate. Pulling up to the wrought iron gates, I looked at the massive stone mansion with fresh eyes. Just yesterday, this estate represented an intimidating fortress of generational wealth. Today, knowing they were drowning in $150 million of toxic debt, the house looked like nothing more than a desperate, crumbling facade. I pushed open the heavy mahogany front doors and walked straight into the formal dining room. There was no dinner waiting. The long polished table was completely bare of plates, silverware, or food. Instead, the entire Wilson family sat waiting for me like a tribunal. Beatrice anchored the head of the table, wearing a smug, predatory expression. Richard stood aggressively by the fireplace, his arms crossed over his chest. Isaiah leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the wood, while Stephanie and Connor flanked their grandmother, looking entirely too pleased with themselves. The silence in the room was thick and suffocating, designed to intimidate me the second I crossed the threshold. I did not break my stride. I walked directly to the opposite end of the table and stood behind the high-backed chair, refusing to sit. Richard pushed himself off the fireplace mantel and marched toward me. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was doing after he drained our joint account and abandoned our marriage. He simply reached inside his tailored jacket, pulled out a thick legal document, and slapped it down hard on the table right in front of me. "This is happening tonight, Audrey," Richard stated, his voice echoing loudly in the cavernous room. "I am not playing your little games anymore. We are securing a bridge loan to expand the company, and your property is being used as collateral. The paperwork is already finalized. You just need to shut your mouth, smile, and verbally verify your consent when the bank representatives call tomorrow morning. I looked down at the document resting on the polished wood. It was a formal deed transfer for my premarital home, the house I had purchased entirely with my own money years before I ever met Richard. I leaned forward slightly and examined the bottom of the last page. There, executed with absolute precision, was my forged signature. They had completely bypassed asking for my permission and went straight to committing felony fraud. "You actually forged my signature to steal my house," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat and devoid of any panic or shock. I looked up and met Richard's gaze. "You drained $300,000 of my money yesterday, and now you want the roof over my son's head. You are completely out of your mind if you think I will ever acknowledge this fraudulent transfer." Beatrice let out a long, theatrical sigh and stood up from her chair. She walked slowly toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "You are always so terribly selfish," Audrey, Beatrice crooned, her voice laced with venomous sweetness. "We are not stealing your house. We are simply leveraging an idle asset to save the family business. It is what family does. Do you have any idea how much we have tolerated from you over the past 5 years? We accepted a mousy, low-class bookkeeper into our elite circle. We tolerated you bringing another man's noisy, disruptive child into our pristine homes. We allowed you to pretend you were one of us. You owe this family your absolute loyalty. You owe us your gratitude. Giving up that house is a small price to pay to ensure Connor and Richard can maintain their rightful lifestyle. Do not be ungrateful, Audrey. The bank will call tomorrow. If you say anything to jeopardize this loan, I will personally ensure you are left with absolutely nothing. You will be on the street, and we will take custody of Leo just to teach you a lesson." I stared at Beatrice, analyzing the profound depths of her arrogance. She truly believed her own twisted narrative. She thought her wealth made her invincible, completely oblivious to the fact that her empire was currently burning to the ground. I slowly reached out and picked up the forged deed transfer from the table. I held it up to the light, pretending to admire the craftsmanship of the fake signature. Everyone in the room watched me closely, expecting me to break down in tears or beg for mercy. Instead, I let out a short, cold laugh. "It is a very impressive forgery, Richard," I said, tapping the bottom corner of the paper with my index finger. "You clearly spent a lot of time perfecting the curves of my handwriting, but you made one catastrophic, incredibly stupid mistake." I dropped the document back onto the table and looked directly into Beatrice's eyes. "You used Robert Vance to notarize this transfer." I pointed to the official blue notary stamp pressed over the signature line. Robert Vance was disbarred and stripped of his notary license for federal wire fraud exactly 3 years ago. The smug, victorious smiles on their faces instantly vanished into pure dread. The silence in the dining room stretched thick and suffocating, wrapping around us like a physical weight. Richard stared at the fraudulent notary stamp, his jaw working furiously as the blood drained from his face. Beatrice gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning bone white. Richard's fear quickly twisted into volatile, explosive rage. He snatched the little forged deed off the table, crumpling the edges, and threw it to the floor. "Fine," Richard spat, his voice dropping an octave and taking on a vicious, menacing edge. "You want to play hardball, Audrey? We can definitely play hardball. Since you want to act like a completely hostile adversary, I will treat you like one right now." He reached into his tailored jacket a second time and produced another thick manila folder. He slammed it down exactly where the deed had been. I did not flinch. "Open it," Richard commanded, pointing a trembling finger at it. I kept my hands clasped together behind my back. "Tell me what it is, Richard." "Since you are a coward, I will read it to you," he sneered. "These are finalized divorce papers drafted by the best litigator in the state. Right beneath them is an emergency petition for full exclusive custody of Leo." A sharp, icy spike of adrenaline pierced my chest. "You are filing for emergency custody of a 9-year-old boy you have actively ignored since birth," I stated, keeping my tone analytical. A boy whose college fund you completely drained to pay for your mother's country club tabs. Richard let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. Do not pretend you hold the moral high ground here, Audrey. You secretly run offshore accounts. You are deceitful, manipulative, and completely unstable. That is exactly what I will tell the court. You are an unfit mother. I stared at him, genuinely appalled by the dark, sheer depth of his absolute depravity. You have absolutely zero grounds for an emergency custody order, I replied. I am the only sole provider for that boy. I personally attend every single soccer game while you sleep with your assistant in cheap, dirty hotel rooms. Beatrice stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with malicious delight. Oh, but we do have proof of your instability, Audrey. Beatrice crooned, resting her hand on Richard's shoulder. We have extensive medical records detailing your severe mental breakdowns and little episodes. My breath caught in my throat. I looked from Beatrice to Richard, the pieces falling into place. You would not dare, I whispered, my voice betraying a fraction of my horror. Richard smiled, a cold, predatory stretching of his lips. I absolutely would dare, Audrey. 9 years ago, you could barely get out of bed for 6 months. You cried constantly. You had to be heavily medicated just to function. I have the pharmacy receipts. Postpartum depression is a severe psychological condition, and I will argue that you never fully recovered. I will tell the judge you are completely unstable. They were maliciously weaponizing the darkest, most terrifying period of my life. After Leo was born, I had suffered from debilitating postpartum depression. It was a severe, terrifying medical crisis that I had bravely fought through with intense therapy and medication. I had meticulously clawed my painful way out of that endless darkness, and now Richard was using that very survival as a cruel weapon to legally steal my only son. You sign the house over to the company today, Richard demanded, leaning over the table. You transfer every dime from your digital vault into my checking account by tomorrow morning. If you do exactly what you are told, I will rip up these custody papers. I will let you walk away with shared custody. If you defy me, I will hire experts to testify that you are an unfit, unstable hoarder. I will take Leo, ensuring you only get supervised visits every other weekend forever. The sheer desperation dripping from his threat was palpable. They did not actually want Leo. Richard viewed my son as an expensive nuisance. Beatrice viewed him as common baggage. They were using my child as a hostage because their corporate ship was rapidly sinking. They desperately needed my house and my money to survive. Then Connor, the youngest and most thoroughly spoiled of the clan, decided to chime in. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, swirling a glass of sparkling water. Let us be honest, Audrey. Connor sneered, his voice dripping with condescending arrogance. You are doing the kid a favor if you just hand him over. You are a low-rent bookkeeper with zero connections and zero class. Leo would be vastly better off in a real wealthy household. Here he gets to grow up properly as a privileged Wilson. He gets the private schools, the status, the inheritance. What can you possibly give him? A cramped apartment and a lifetime of mediocrity. Connor's cruel words hung heavily in the dead air like toxic smoke. A supposedly real wealthy household. An inheritance. They were shamelessly boasting about a fake legacy that was currently $150 million in the red. They were bragging about offering my son a life built entirely on fraud, tax evasion, and stolen college funds. The cold, analytical detachment I had maintained for the past 24 hours completely vanished. It was instantly incinerated by a sudden, all-consuming surge of pure maternal fury. They had finally crossed the last unforgivable line. Attacking my finances was a massive strategic error. Attacking my marriage was a deep personal betrayal. But threatening to take my only son and intentionally twisting my trauma into a weapon was a declaration of absolute war. I did not just want to expose their debt to the authorities anymore. I wanted to witness their complete, utter destruction. I wanted to watch them lose the mansion, the cars, their fake social status, and every single thing they valued in this world. The silence in the dining room was absolute, broken only by the arrogant breathing of the family who thought they had just won. They expected me to fall to my knees to beg for my son to sign away my house and my dignity just to keep Leo. Richard slid a silver pen across the polished mahogany table. "Sign the deed, Audrey," he commanded, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. I looked at the pen, then at the custody papers detailing my darkest hours of postpartum depression, weaponized to steal my child. I did not reach for the pen. I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the table, closing the physical distance between us. "You win," I finally said, my voice barely above a quiet whisper. Beatrice smiled, a triumphant razor-thin line across her face. "I told you, Richard," she murmured, sipping her sparkling water. I kept my eyes locked on Richard, but shifted my focus to Isaiah, who was leaning back in his chair with that insufferable smug grin. "But you are looking at the wrong asset, Richard." I continued, my voice steadying. "You are trying to steal an $800,000 house to secure a $5 million bridge loan." Richard frowned, his hand freezing over the divorce papers. "What are you talking about?" I turned my gaze fully to Isaiah. "The USB drive you stole from my purse last night," I said, making sure my voice carried a tremor of genuine fear. "You think it is a slush fund?" Isaiah scoffed, sitting forward. "I know exactly what it is. My guys are already slicing through the outer firewalls." I let a look of sheer panic cross my face. "Stop them, Isaiah," I demanded, injecting desperation into my tone. "Right now, tell them to stop. If they trigger the secondary failsafe, you will lose everything." Beatrice set her glass down with a sharp clink. "Lose what, Audrey?" I took a deep breath, looking around the room as if checking for listening devices. I played the role of a desperate woman offering a plea bargain to save her son. 5 years ago, before I met Richard, I worked as a forensic auditor for a private defense contractor. I lied, weaving enough truth into the fiction to make it airtight. I uncovered a massive embezzlement ring. Instead of reporting it, I diverted the funds. I buried the money in a ghost account in the Cayman Islands. The room went dead silent. "How much?" Richard asked, his voice suddenly breathless. The custody papers completely forgotten. $50 million, I stated clearly, watching the greed ignite in their eyes. 50 million in untraceable, completely clean cash. It holds the direct access codes and the routing algorithms to pull the money out. Isaiah let out a low whistle, his eyes darting toward the hallway. 50 million, he repeated. "But there is a catch," I warned them, standing up slowly to command the room. "I designed the security architecture myself. If your amateur hacker friends try to bypass the core encryption without my specific thumbprint and retinal scan, the drive will execute a total data wipe. It will instantly self-destruct the access codes and ping international authorities with your exact IP address. The money will be locked forever, and you will have the feds kicking down your door by morning." I watched them swallow the bait. I knew their financial reality. I had downloaded the proof that their precious empire was $150 million in debt. They were facing audits, insolvency, and utter ruin. $50 million represented their salvation. I knew exactly how greed functioned in people who believed they were untouchable. Beatrice stood up, her eyes gleaming with a manic, desperate light. "You are lying," she snapped, though her trembling hands betrayed her excitement. "You do not have $50 million. I lived like a commoner because I could not risk drawing attention from the people I stole it from." "Beatrice," I countered, keeping my voice low and urgent. "I am offering you a deal. You tear up those custody papers right now. You drop the fake deed transfer. You let me walk out of here with Leo untouched and unbothered. In exchange, I will come back tomorrow morning, unlock the drive myself, and transfer the 50 million into the corporate accounts. It will clear your debts. But you have to let me do it. If Isaiah touches that drive, the money is gone forever." Richard looked at his mother, a silent conversation passing between them. They were weighing the immediate satisfaction of stealing my house against the astronomical payout of $50 million. "Do not touch the drive," I warned Isaiah one final time, my voice dripping with absolute dread. "I mean it, Isaiah. You will burn it all to the ground." I turned my back on the tribunal. I did not sign a single document. I left the silver pen resting on top of the forged deed. I walked out of the formal dining room, my heels clicking sharply against the marble, projecting the image of a defeated woman fleeing the battlefield. I reached the heavy mahogany front doors and pushed them open, stepping out into the cool evening air. Before the doors swung shut, I glanced back over my shoulder. Through the long corridor, I saw exactly what I had engineered. Richard and Beatrice were intensely arguing over the custody papers, but Isaiah was not listening to them. Isaiah was already sprinting down the hallway toward his office. His face was flushed with adrenaline, his eyes wide with unadulterated greed. He was pulling his phone from his pocket, shouting at his hackers to push harder, convinced he was a genius about to secure a multi-million-dollar fortune. He was ignoring every warning I had just given him. He was diving headfirst into the trap, completely blind to the fact that my federal servers were currently tearing his entire digital life apart. I smiled, letting the heavy doors close securely behind me. The school bell cut through the crisp air. I was running 4 minutes late, stuck at a red light. I had spent the morning watching Isaiah trigger the honeypot on the USB drive. The federal trap had snapped shut, cataloging every illicit transaction the Wilsons ever created. I should have felt relief. Instead, dread gnawed at my skull. The light turned green. I accelerated toward the pickup zone. What I saw froze my blood. Parked illegally across the yellow lines was a midnight black Porsche. Connor. He had used the money Richard drained from my joint account to buy his status symbol days ago. Connor leaned against the door wearing designer sunglasses and a blazer. He was leaning down, cornering a small figure on the sidewalk. It was Leo. My 9-year-old son stood frozen, his backpack sliding off his shoulder, his eyes wide with terror. Connor was smiling a vicious, predatory expression. I slammed my foot on the gas. My SUV roared as I bypassed the waiting minivans. I whipped the steering wheel right, jumping the curb, and slammed my vehicle diagonally across the front of Connor's Porsche. The screech of tires drew gasps from nearby parents, but I did not care. I threw the gearshift into park and threw open my door. I hit the pavement running, closing the distance in 3 strides. As I approached, Connor's venomous words became sickeningly clear. "Your mother is a criminal, Leo." Connor sneered, leaning closer to my trembling child. "She stole money, and the police are coming for her tonight. She is going to federal prison for a long time. You are going to be taken away by strangers, and you will never see her again. Unless you come with me right now, our family can protect you." Leo took a desperate step backward, tears spilling down his pale cheeks. He clutched his backpack, his small chest heaving with panicked sobs. "Get away from my son!" I roared, my voice cracking like a whip across the crowded sidewalk. Connor jumped, spinning around to face me. The smug smile was replaced by an ugly scowl. He stood up straight, trying to physically intimidate me with his height. I did not slow down. I stepped directly between him and Leo, shielding my son with my body. I reached back, finding Leo's hand and gripping it tightly. "You need to back off," Audrey, Connor barked, pointing a finger at my chest. "I am just telling the boy the truth. You are finished. Richard filed the paperwork this morning. You are broke, unstable, and going to lose everything. I am vice president of Wilson Manufacturing now. I have real power. I have money. You are just a sad, pathetic nothing." I stared up at him, studying the weak, arrogant boy standing before me. He believed a fancy title and a stolen car made him invincible. I felt a cold, surgical calm wash over my blinding rage. "You are a vice president of absolutely nothing, Connor," I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet volume. "You think you are a titan of industry because Beatrice gave you a corner office. But I read the raw ledgers last night while your idiot brother was busy hacking my federal honeypot. I know the exact truth about your pathetic performance." Connor flinched, his eyes darting nervously toward the gathering crowd of parents openly watching our confrontation. "What are you talking about?" he muttered, his bravado slipping. "Your division has not closed a single legitimate sale in 14 months, I recited with absolute lethal precision. You personally lost the Harrison account, costing the firm $4 million in annual revenue. To cover up your gross incompetence, you authorized illegal kickbacks to dummy corporations in Delaware. Your net contribution to the family business last quarter was negative $2.6 million. You are not a leader, Connor. You are a massive liability. You are the financial anchor dragging your family straight to the bottom of the ocean. The color drained entirely from Connor's face. His jaw worked, trying to form a coherent response, but only a strangled sound escaped his throat. He looked around wildly, suddenly hyper-aware of the audience. The illusion of his success had been brutally shattered in front of the demographic he desperately wanted to impress. And this car, I continued gesturing to the Porsche, was purchased using $300,000 stolen directly from my checking account. It is evidence in a federal wire fraud investigation. Enjoy the leather seats while you can, because the marshals will be impounding it before the weekend is over. Connor stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own loafers. He looked at me as if I had suddenly transformed into a monster. He did not say another word. He scrambled into the driver's seat, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his keys twice before starting the engine. He threw the car into reverse, nearly hitting a parked minivan, and sped off down the street, running a stop sign in his desperate rush to escape. His exhaust roar faded. I dropped to my knees on the hard concrete. Leo threw his arms around my neck, his small body shaking uncontrollably. I wrapped him in a fierce embrace, whispering promises into his hair. I told him he was safe and Connor was a liar. As I held my terrified son on the sidewalk, surrounded by the hushed whispers of concerned strangers, the cold reality of the situation solidified in my mind. They were not just fighting for a bridge loan anymore. They were not just trying to steal my house or silence me with threats. They had intentionally driven to my son's school to terrorize a 9-year-old boy. They were actively targeting my child to break me. I closed my eyes, resting my cheek against his hair. The corporate espionage and financial maneuvers were over. The gloves were completely off. I was going to utterly destroy them. I drove away from the elementary school, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Leo sat in the passenger seat, his heavy breathing slowing to a normal rhythm. I did not take him back to our house. The Wilson family knew where we lived, and after Connor's psychotic stunt, our home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a target. Instead, I navigated through the winding streets of downtown, checking my rearview mirror constantly. I pulled into the underground garage of an unlisted exclusive boutique hotel. My agency maintained a rotating suite of secure safe houses for operatives requiring immediate extraction, and this penthouse was a fortress. Plainclothes security monitored the lobby, and the elevator required a biometric scan to access the top floor. Once inside the suite, I focused entirely on Leo. I ordered his favorite meal through the secure concierge and sat with him on the plush velvet sofa while he ate. I spoke in calm tones, explaining we were taking a fun, spontaneous vacation for a few days. I watched a cartoon movie with him until his eyelids grew heavy. I tucked him into the massive king bed, waiting until his breathing deepened into the steady cadence of sleep. I kissed his forehead, closed the door quietly, and walked into the adjoining living area. The comforting mother vanished. The forensic auditor took her place. I sat down at the cold glass dining table and pulled my encrypted agency terminal from my bag. I booted up the system, bypassed the firewall protocols, and accessed my personal financial network. Richard thought he had outmaneuvered me when he drained our primary joint checking account. He foolishly believed that action left me financially paralyzed. What he spectacularly failed to understand was that the bulk of his luxurious existence was funded by secondary credit lines. Years ago, to boost his abysmal credit score, I authorized him as a secondary user on 3 platinum accounts. He used them like a limitless slush fund. I pulled up the real-time transaction logs. The sheer audacity of his spending was displayed in glowing green numbers across my screen. He was not just buying groceries. He was funding his entire illicit lifestyle on my dime. I saw the recurring charges for the boutique hotel, where he met his mistress, Sydney. I saw the five-star restaurant tabs and luxury car detailing. Stephanie, his sister, was also an authorized user on one of the cards, a supposed emergency measure that she treated as a personal shopping allowance. I cracked my knuckles and typed in my master override credentials. It was time to drop the financial guillotine. I did not just cancel the cards. I executed a hard, targeted security freeze, flagging every active account linked to Richard and Stephanie for immediate suspected fraud. The digital ledger allowed me to see their pending real-time authorizations. I watched the screen as the network pinged with their current locations. Richard was currently standing inside an elite high-security jewelry store in the financial district. He was attempting to authorize a $45,000 transaction, a diamond necklace for Sydney. Stephanie was checking out at a high-end designer boutique across town, attempting to process a $12,000 charge for imported leather goods. I hovered my finger over the execution key. I pictured Connor threatening my son. I pictured Richard throwing the custody papers on the table. I pictured Beatrice sneering at my supposed lack of class. I pressed the enter key. The freeze was instantaneous, absolute, and utterly irreversible. In the real world, the impact would be devastatingly immediate. I pictured the exact scene unfolding in the jewelry store. Richard wearing his custom-tailored suit, leaning against the glass counter with arrogant confidence. Sydney standing beside him, vibrating with excitement as the jeweler carefully boxed up a $45,000 diamond necklace. Richard sliding my platinum card across the velvet mat, projecting the image of a wealthy titan of industry. Then the inevitable beep of the card reader. The jeweler frowning, swiping the card a second time. The polite clearing of the throat. The quiet announcement that the card was completely declined. I knew Richard's reaction. He would laugh it off. He would blame a bank error, pulling out a second card. But that card would be declined too. The jeweler's smile would fade into suspicious judgment. Sydney's excitement would curdle into profound embarrassment. The other wealthy patrons would turn to watch the impeccably dressed man failing to buy jewelry for his mistress. The humiliation would be visceral, public, and inescapable. Simultaneously, Stephanie would be experiencing the exact same catastrophic humiliation. She would be standing at the register of her favorite designer boutique, arguing with a store manager who was actively cutting her secondary card in half per the fraud alert instructions. Her fake socialite status evaporating in front of the people she desperately sought to impress. My phone lit up on the glass table. A notification pinged. Transaction declined, $45,000. Another ping. Transaction declined, $12,000. Then a flood of automated alerts cascaded down my screen as the banks locked down every digital pathway Richard possessed. Transaction declined. Account frozen. Fraud alert activated. Seconds later, the screen shifted to an incoming call. The caller ID flashed brightly in the dim room. It was Richard. I let it ring. The vibration buzzed violently against the glass table, reflecting his absolute panic. He called a second time, then a third desperate time. I finally picked up the device and accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a word. Audrey, Richard screamed, his voice entirely stripped of its usual smooth arrogance. He sounded breathless, frantic, and completely unhinged. "What did you do?" "The jeweler just declined all my cards." "Sydney is crying in the lobby. Turn the accounts back on right now." "I swear to God, Audrey, turn them back on. Please, you have to fix this." I listened to his frantic breathing echoing loudly through the speaker. I did not try to match his desperate, erratic energy with my own. I let a heavy silence stretch between us for a very long time before I finally spoke. "I am not fixing anything, Richard," I replied, my voice freezing cold. "I am cutting you off. The financial parasite has been officially severed. You are going to have to look Sydney in the eye and explain that you are not a wealthy executive. You are a broke, unemployed fraud who has been surviving entirely on his wife's credit score for the past 4 years. Richard let out a strangled sound of pure, unadulterated rage. "You cannot do this to me, Audrey," he bellowed, his fist slamming violently against a hard surface. "I am standing in a high-end boutique. The manager is looking at me like I am a thief. You are embarrassing me in front of Sydney. Turn the cards back on right now, or I promise I will make your life a living hell. I will take everything from you. You have already tried to take everything I countered, staring blankly at my glowing terminal. You tried to steal my house. You cruelly weaponized my medical history. You sent your brother to terrorize my son in a parking lot. You crossed the absolute line. There is no coming back from this. You are completely financially stranded. You cannot buy a diamond necklace. You cannot pay for your luxury hotel room. You cannot even afford an Uber back to your crumbling mansion. You are done. For a brief moment, there was nothing but his ragged, heavy breathing. I fully expected him to beg. I expected another pathetic tirade. Instead, a low, dark chuckle started to rumble in his chest. The chuckle quickly morphed into a loud, maniacal laugh that echoed sickeningly through the phone. It was the sound of a man who firmly believed he had just uncovered the ultimate winning hand. You really think you outsmarted us? Audrey. Richard sneered, his voice dripping with arrogant, toxic confidence. You think freezing a couple of credit cards means you win. You are hopelessly small-minded. You play simple checkers while we play chess. You thought your little warning about the offshore account would scare us off. You thought telling Isaiah about a trap would make us back down. My fingers hovered silently over the keyboard. What did you do, Richard? I asked, injecting a perfect dose of manufactured panic into my tone to feed his massive ego. We called your bluff, you idiot! Richard gloated, his words slurring slightly with intoxicating triumph. Isaiah is a digital genius. He bypassed your pathetic final firewall 10 minutes ago. He completely bypassed the biometric locks you claimed were impenetrable. We are in Audrey. We have full, unrestricted access to the $50 million in offshore assets. We saw the raw ledgers. It is all sitting right there. I covered the microphone with my hand and let out a silent, sharp breath. He was falling perfectly into the abyss. You touched the drive, I whispered, projecting absolute horror. Richard, I warned you. That money is flagged. The only thing flagged is your impending poverty. Richard snapped back, his voice rising with manic excitement. We did not just access the drive, Audrey. We leveraged it. We are not stupid enough to wire the cash directly into our accounts and trigger a banking alert. My mother is a brilliant strategist. We immediately took those routing numbers and asset verification codes and handed them straight to the underwriters at Summit Financial. I froze. My eyes locked onto the screen. That is right, Richard continued, riding the high of his own perceived brilliance. We pledged the entire $50 million offshore portfolio as hard collateral for a massive corporate rescue loan. The underwriters at Summit Financial took one look at those verified balances and approved our bridge loan on the spot. The ink is drying right now. By tomorrow morning, Wilson Manufacturing will be injected with $10 million in liquid capital. We are going to be richer than ever before. He paused, letting his vicious victory fully sink in. And once that money clears, Audrey, I am coming for you. I am going to hire the most ruthless, expensive litigators in the state. I am going to bury you in legal fees until you drown in debt. I will clearly prove you are an unfit, mentally unstable mother who hoards illegal offshore funds. I will take full custody of Leo. I will take your house. I will leave you rotting in a gutter. You are a footnote in my success story. Enjoy your cheap hotel room tonight because it is the best you will ever have it. The line went dead. He hung up on me. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. I sat in the dim light of the penthouse safe house, the glow of my encrypted terminal reflecting off my face. I looked at the sleeping form of my son in the next room, then looked back at the screen displaying the active federal honeypot. A soft, quiet giggle escaped my throat. It bubbled up into a genuine, chilling laugh that filled the empty room. It was not a laugh of fear or defeat. It was the laugh of a predator watching its prey willingly step into an iron cage and lock the door from the inside. Richard thought he had outmaneuvered me. Beatrice thought she had played a masterstroke of corporate strategy. Isaiah thought he was a genius hacker who had bypassed a federal firewall. They genuinely believed they had outsmarted a forensic auditor by using stolen digital assets to secure a massive loan. They had taken a USB drive filled with meticulously fabricated evidence of federal wire fraud, international tax evasion, and ghost accounts, and they proudly handed it directly over to a major financial institution to secure a multi-million-dollar loan. But they did not hand it to just any bank. They handed it to Summit Financial. Summit Financial was not just a lender. They were my direct client. They were the specific financial institution that had hired my covert agency to audit their high-risk corporate loans and root out fraudulent collateral. The Wilsons had not just committed a felony, they had gift-wrapped their own financial execution and handed it directly to the exact institution I was currently employed to protect. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had crushed their entire empire into dust. The dawn light broke across the city skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished mahogany table of the Summit Financial Executive Boardroom. I stood at the head of the table dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, a stark contrast to the terrified, defeated wife I had played just 12 hours earlier. The room was deathly quiet, occupied by the most powerful people in the building. To my right sat Marcus Vance, the director of the Federal Financial Crimes Unit, his arms crossed over his chest. To my left sat the legal team representing Summit Financial, alongside their CEO Jonathan Sterling. I pressed a button on my remote, bringing the massive digital projector to life. A complex web of data nodes, IP addresses, and routing algorithms illuminated the darkened room. At exactly 9:14 last night, I began, my voice steady and commanding. Isaiah Wilson bypassed the secondary firewall on the USB drive he stole from my purse. He believed he was accessing a $50 million offshore slush fund. He immediately initiated a collateral transfer protocol, pledging those fabricated assets to secure the $10 million corporate bridge loan your underwriting department has been evaluating for Wilson Manufacturing. I zoomed in on a specific cluster of red data points on the screen. Because the USB drive is a heavily tracked federal device, I continued pacing slowly across the front of the room. Every single keystroke Isaiah made was logged, time-stamped, and directly routed to our servers. He used his personal unsecured home network. He used his personal MAC address. He practically signed a confession. He handed over federal wire fraud evidence directly to the institution he was trying to defraud. Jonathan Sterling leaned forward, resting his chin on his steepled hands. His eyes narrowed as he scrutinized the data on the screen. He reviewed the application yesterday afternoon. The Wilsons were desperate. Their core manufacturing business was hemorrhaging cash, and they needed this $10 million to avoid defaulting on 3 separate international contracts. Richard Wilson personally assured the underwriters that the collateral would be verified by midnight. He kept his promise, Director Vance said, a grim, satisfied smile touching the corners of his mouth. He just verified his own federal indictment. Vance stood up and walked over to the screen, tracing the red line connecting Isaiah's IP address to the Summit Financial servers. "You did exceptional work here," Audrey Vance said, turning to face me. "For the past 12 months, you embedded yourself entirely within that family. You tolerated their abuse, documented their illicit financial maneuvers, and mapped their entire network of dummy corporations. We knew they were bleeding money, but we needed them to take a definitive, undeniable step over the line. You gave them the rope, and their own staggering arrogance did the rest. They genuinely believed they were the smartest people in the room. They believed they were untouchable." I corrected quietly, remembering the look of pure venom on Connor's face when he cornered my son, and the absolute glee in Richard's voice when he threatened to take Leo away from me. They thought my money, my assets, and my child were theirs for the taking. They operate under the delusion that wealth excuses morality. Sterling shook his head in disgust, picking up a heavy silver pen from his blotter. "So the assets on the drive are entirely fictitious. Fabricated down to the last cent," I confirmed, tapping the remote to show the false offshore ledgers. "It is a digital mirage designed by our unit. If your underwriters had attempted to actually draw against those funds, the accounts would have instantly dissolved. But the act of pledging them, of willfully using stolen, falsified digital assets to secure a commercial loan from a federally backed institution, constitutes massive wire fraud." Combined with the embezzlement records we have already secured, the Wilson family is looking at decades in federal prison. The legal team murmured in agreement, rapidly taking notes and organizing incoming data streams into formal case files. The evidence was airtight. There were no loopholes, no clever accounting tricks Richard could use to escape this. They were backed into a corner of their own making. Sterling looked at the loan approval document sitting on the desk in front of him. Richard Wilson scheduled a formal victory signing party for 3 o'clock this afternoon at their corporate headquarters. Sterling noted, his voice laced with cold authority. He requested that our senior loan officers attend to finalize the transfer and celebrate their new partnership. He plans to pop champagne and toast to his family's continued dominance. Director Vance looked at me, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "What is your recommendation, Audrey?" I placed both hands flat on the table, leaning in close. "We do not just reject the loan," I stated, feeling the icy resolve settle deep in my chest. "We give them exactly what they want. We let them host their lavish party. We let them gather their shareholders, their board of directors, and their arrogant family members in one room. We let Richard raise his glass and give his victory speech." Sterling smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. And then I said, looking directly at Vance, "We authorize the federal tactical teams to breach the building. We execute a fully coordinated raid during the height of celebration. We freeze every legitimate asset they possess, seize their corporate servers, and march Richard, Beatrice, Isaiah, and Connor out of their own headquarters in handcuffs in front of their entire professional network." Sterling did not hesitate. He clicked his silver pen and signed his name forcefully across the bottom of the federal authorization order. He slid the heavy parchment folder across the polished mahogany table toward Director Vance. "Greenlight the raid," Sterling commanded, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet boardroom. "Burn their empire to the ground." I picked up the signed authorization, feeling the heavy weight of the paper in my hands. The endgame had officially begun. At exactly 2:45 that afternoon, the atmosphere inside the Apex suite of the Grand Monarch Hotel was intoxicatingly arrogant. The penthouse was a sprawling monument to excess, offering a panoramic view of the city. The Wilson family rented it specifically for this moment, eager to elevate themselves above the world while securing their financial salvation. A cork popped with a sharp crack echoing against the vaulted ceiling. Connor cheered loudly, catching the overflow of vintage champagne in a crystal flute. He had completely shed the terrified demeanor from our parking lot encounter, his bruised ego healed by the promise of unlimited capital. He handed the glass to Isaiah, who was slouched deeply into a white leather sectional, a smug grin plastered across his face. "I told you it was child's play," Isaiah boasted, taking a long drink. "The federal firewall was a joke. They think encryption keys can stop someone who understands backdoor routing." I sliced through her little trap in under 12 minutes. Audrey actually thought she was a genius for hiding those $50 million in offshore accounts. I just took her golden goose and handed it straight to Summit Financial. They did not even blink. The underwriters were practically drooling over the asset verification. Connor laughed, slapping his brother on the shoulder. "You saved the empire, man. Once that 10 million clears, we are completely untouchable. We can finally expand the division and crush our competitors." They spoke of the business as if they actually contributed, willfully blind that their gross incompetence was why they needed a rescue loan. Across the room, Richard was leaning against the marble wet bar, staring intently at his phone. His face twisted in greedy anticipation as he texted Sydney. I monitored his digital footprint through my agency terminal. He was promising his beautiful young mistress the entire world. He was specifically promising her my home. "Just wait until the divorce is finalized, baby." Richard typed his words, logging directly into my secure federal server. "I am kicking Audrey out with absolutely nothing. The judge will grant me the Beacon Hill house once I show the court her fake offshore accounts. It is going to be completely ours. I will let you redesign the entire first floor." He hit send, took a sip of his bourbon, and looked up as his sister Stephanie strutted into the room. She was carrying 3 designer bags, having bypassed the credit freeze by manipulating one of Beatrice's emergency accounts. I do not care what the bank said last night about those cards, Stephanie announced, dropping her heavy bags onto a thick glass table. It was obviously a system error. And once Summit signs this paperwork today, I am upgrading my entire spring wardrobe. The manager at the boutique actually tried to tell me my platinum card was flagged for fraud. I told her I would buy her entire store by Friday afternoon and loudly fire her myself. Richard chuckled, pocketing his phone. Let Audrey play her petty little games with the credit limits. It does not matter anymore. By 3 o'clock, we will have a $10 million injection. We can simply buy a brand new bank if we want to. Beatrice sat in a high-backed armchair near the windows, overseeing her children with a cold, triumphant satisfaction. She held a crystal glass of sparkling water, her posture rigid and incredibly regal. She was the ultimate architect of their delusion, the matriarch who had convinced them that taking what did not belong to them was their divine right. "You boys did very well," Beatrice declared, her icy voice cutting through the celebratory chatter. "You took the initiative. Audrey was a parasite draining our resources. She thought she could hide her little nest egg from this family. She thought she could keep Leo away from us. But we are Wilsons. We do not negotiate, and we certainly do not lose to a commoner." She stood up, walking slowly toward the exact center of the room. Her eyes gleamed with a vicious, calculating light as she began to divide my life among her terrible children. "Richard," Beatrice instructed, pointing a manicured finger at her eldest son. "You will file the emergency custody injunction the very second the Summit executives leave. You will use the $50 million asset discovery to prove Audrey is an unfit mother involved in federal wire fraud. The judge will give you Leo immediately. Stephanie, you will begin contacting real estate agents. We are going to liquidate Audrey's personal property to cover the legal fees. Isaiah, I want you to start quietly siphoning those offshore funds into our dummy corporations in Delaware. We will drain her dry before she even realizes what hit her." They nodded eagerly, a pack of wolves dividing a carcass they had not yet killed. The sheer narcissism on display was breathtaking. They were actively conspiring to steal my money, my home, and my child, all while drinking expensive champagne and celebrating their own supposed brilliance. Beatrice glanced at the antique gold clock resting on the mantel. It was exactly 2:58. She slowly smoothed the front of her designer dress and picked up a silver spoon. She clinked it sharply against her crystal glass. The bright, high sound brought the room to an immediate total standstill. "Quiet down, everyone," Beatrice commanded, her face breaking into a wide, victorious smile. "Look sharp. The executives from Summit Financial are due any second. It is time to sign the paperwork. It is time to claim exactly what we are rightfully owed." She turned toward the entrance of the penthouse, waiting to welcome their financial saviors. The room fell into a hushed, reverent silence. At precisely 3 o'clock, the heavy mahogany double doors of the penthouse suite did not just simply open, they burst inward with a violent, splintering crash that shook the walls. But it was certainly not the Summit financial executives who walked into the room. The heavy mahogany doors slammed backward, the polished wood striking the plaster walls with a deafening crack that rattled the crystal chandeliers. The sudden violent noise instantly silenced the room. The triumphant smiles vanished from the Wilsons' faces, replaced by bewildered shock. I walked through the entryway, my heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic cadence against the Italian marble floor. The mousy, accommodating bookkeeper they had systematically abused for years was completely gone. I had shed the oversized sweaters and the submissive posture. In their place, I wore a sharply tailored midnight blue power suit, a stark and lethal silhouette against the bright, excessive backdrop of the penthouse. My hair was pulled back into a severe, sleek twist, and my expression was absolute zero. I did not look like a defeated, soon-to-be ex-wife begging for scraps. I looked like an executioner arriving to collect a debt. I did not walk in alone. Flanking my right side was Jonathan Sterling, the fiercely intimidating Chief Executive Officer of Summit Financial. To my left stood 2 federal agents wearing tactical windbreakers, bearing the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Behind us, 4 heavily armed private security contractors fanned out instantly, securing the exits and blocking the elevators. Their presence sucked all the air out of the massive suite. The atmosphere shifted from a celebration of unearned wealth to a tense, suffocating lockdown. Richard was the first to break the stunned silence. His face contorted from shock into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The delusion of his power was so deeply ingrained that he failed to process the tactical vests and federal badges. He only saw his favorite victim standing in a room he believed he owned. "What the hell is this?" Richard bellowed, slamming his empty champagne flute onto the wet bar so hard the stem cracked. He lunged forward, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. "Audrey, have you completely lost your mind? You tracked me down here during the most important corporate meeting of my entire life." He did not wait for my response. He aggressively turned his attention to the armed security contractors blocking the entryway. "Grab her," Richard ordered, pointing a trembling, furious finger directly at my chest. "Get this crazy, unstable woman out of my penthouse immediately. She is my soon-to-be ex-wife. She is having a psychotic breakdown because I am leaving her and taking our son. Throw her out on the street before my real guests arrive, or I will have every single one of you fired by the end of the day." The security contractors did not flinch. They did not even blink. They remained planted like statues, their eyes locked forward. Richard took another aggressive step toward me, his hands balled into tight fists, completely blind to the reality of the trap he was standing in. Stephanie stepped out from behind the white leather sectional, entirely misreading the gravity of the situation. She clutched one of her newly acquired designer handbags, a mocking, vicious sneer spreading across her perfectly contoured face. She looked me up and down, letting out a sharp, theatrical laugh that echoed off the floor to ceiling windows. "Oh my God, this is incredibly pathetic," Stephanie taunted, taking a sip from her glass. "You are seriously crashing a billionaire-level corporate summit just to beg my brother to take you back. Did you rent that suit to try and impress him?" Newsflash, Audrey. Richard is trading up. Sydney is 10 times the woman you are, and she actually knows how to dress for a penthouse. You are embarrassing yourself. Go back to your cheap hotel and cry. You are completely finished." Isaiah leaned back against the cushions, shaking his head in arrogant amusement. He was still holding his phone, probably refreshing his bank app, eagerly waiting for the stolen millions to appear. He chimed in, perfectly mirroring his sister's toxic delusion. "You really should leave, Audrey." Isaiah warned, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have zero leverage left. You tried your little cyber tricks, but I completely dismantled your offshore security an hour ago. The money is secured. The bridge loan is approved. You played a stupid game and you lost everything. Just walk away before you make this any more pathetic than it already is." I stood perfectly still. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself against their juvenile insults. I simply stared at them, absorbing the absolute depth of their narcissistic blindness. They had spent their entire lives living in a fabricated reality where their actions carried no consequences, where they could abuse, steal, and destroy without ever facing a reckoning. They were so consumed by their own perceived brilliance that they literally could not comprehend the immense danger standing right in front of them. Beatrice remained by the windows. She had not spoken a single word since the doors burst open. She stood rigidly, her knuckles white as she gripped her crystal glass. Unlike her foolish children, the matriarch possessed a predator's survival instinct. Her cold, calculating eyes darted from my tailored suit to the federal agents and finally settled on Jonathan Sterling. She recognized the chief executive officer of Summit Financial immediately. She knew exactly who he was, and she knew he was not standing there to celebrate a loan approval. The blood drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking like a pale, hollowed-out ghost. Richard stepped closer, his anger boiling over into blind desperation. "I said, get her out!" he screamed at Sterling, completely oblivious to the man's identity. "Who the hell are you people? I am Richard Wilson. I am securing a $10 million transaction today." Jonathan Sterling slowly adjusted his suit jacket. He did not look at Richard. He did not look at Stephanie or Isaiah or the luxurious surroundings. He treated the Wilson family as if they were nothing more than an unpleasant odor in the room. Sterling turned his body slightly, angling himself toward me. He bowed his head in a gesture of profound, unmistakable respect. Lead investigator Sterling said, his deep, authoritative voice cutting through Richard's manic screaming like a sharp blade. "The perimeter is fully secured. The building is locked down. We are ready for your assessment." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of an empire collapsing into dust. Across the room, Beatrice's fingers went slack. The crystal champagne glass slipped from her hand, falling in slow motion. It hit the marble floor, shattering into 1,000 jagged, glittering pieces. The sound of Beatrice dropping her crystal champagne glass echoed like a gunshot. The fragile shards scattered across the imported marble floor, a perfect physical manifestation of the Wilson family empire, fracturing into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. Nobody moved to clean it up. Nobody even breathed. The air in the penthouse suite, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and arrogance just seconds prior, suddenly felt as heavy and suffocating as wet cement. I did not break my stride. I stepped right over the glittering debris, my high heels clicking with rhythmic, terrifying precision, until I reached the absolute head of the long mahogany table. This was the exact spot Richard always claimed for himself during his arrogant family summits. I placed my hands flat against the polished wood and surveyed the room. The sheer panic radiating from their faces was intoxicating. Richard stared at me with his mouth slightly open, his brain completely misfiring as it struggled to reconcile the submissive wife he thought he knew with the commanding federal investigator standing before him. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was suspended in midair, waiting for gravity to take hold. "What is this?" Richard finally choked out, his voice stripped of its usual booming authority. It sounded thin, reedy, and incredibly weak. "This is a joke. You are a low-level bookkeeper, Audrey. You balance spreadsheets. You do not command federal agents." I offered him a smile that contained absolutely no warmth. "That is the fundamental problem with narcissists, Richard. You only see what serves your ego. You needed a quiet, manageable wife who would balance the books and look the other way while you bled your own company dry and paraded your mistresses around the city. So I gave you exactly what you wanted. I played the mousy, obedient accountant for years, but I was never your bookkeeper. I am a senior forensic financial investigator for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, cross-credentialed with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network." Stephanie let out a loud, nervous scoff, instinctively gripping her new designer bags as if they could somehow shield her from reality. "That is completely insane. You are lying. You only started this revenge plot because Richard got caught sleeping with Sydney." I turned my gaze to Stephanie, letting the absolute zero temperature of my stare freeze the remaining defiance right out of her. "Sydney was just the catalyst for my personal exit strategy, Stephanie. I was tracking your family long before your brother ever unzipped his trousers in the office supply closet. The Bureau flagged Wilson Manufacturing for aggressive money laundering and international tax evasion 3 years ago. You were moving dirty money through dummy corporations in the Cayman Islands and using inflated real estate portfolios to secure fraudulent domestic loans. We just needed an inside operator to map the network. I volunteered for the assignment." Beatrice gripped the back of her white leather armchair, her knuckles turning bone white. Her regal posture collapsed, leaving her looking suddenly like a very old, very terrified woman. She tried to speak, but her throat seemed paralyzed. "That is right, Beatrice," I continued, my voice ringing with undeniable authority. "Every Sunday dinner I suffered through every passive-aggressive insult about my wardrobe or my background. Every time you lectured me about the superiority of the Wilson bloodline, I was mentally cataloging your offshore routing numbers. I was auditing your offshore trusts while you forced me to serve you tea. You thought you were keeping me in my place. In reality, I was building the precise cage you are about to spend the rest of your life locked inside." I walked slowly around the table, closing the distance between myself and Isaiah. He was still slouched on the sectional, but his smug, arrogant grin had completely vanished. He looked physically sick. His pale hands were trembling against his knees. "And then there is our resident digital genius," I said, stopping right in front of him. "Isaiah, you really thought you outsmarted a federal cybersecurity division. You thought freezing my credit cards was a masterstroke. You sat there gloating about how easily you bypassed my biometric locks and sliced through the secondary firewall on that USB drive. Isaiah swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. We have the assets, he stammered, his voice lacking any of its former bravado. I transferred the ledgers. The money is secured. I leaned down, placing my hands on the armrests of his chair, trapping him in place. There was never any money, Isaiah. That USB drive was not a vault. It was a Trojan horse. It was a highly sophisticated, federally engineered piece of bait. When you plugged that drive into your unsecured home network and bypassed the fake firewall, you did not break into my system. You opened the front door to yours. The moment that drive connected, it executed a silent mirroring protocol. It copied your entire illicit server. Every hidden email, every encrypted transaction, every piece of blackmail you hold against your own board members, it was all packaged and transmitted directly to the servers at the Federal Bureau of Investigation in real time. We watched you do it. We cheered for you. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The air rushed out of his lungs in a sharp gasp. His eyes darted wildly around the room, finally locking onto his silver laptop, resting on the glass coffee table just inches from his left leg. Panic, raw and unfiltered, consumed him. He realized that the machine was currently broadcasting his location and actively logging the Summit financial loan fraud. Isaiah lunged forward. He threw his entire body weight toward the table, his hands stretching desperately for the keyboard, screaming that he could run a wipe protocol and scrub the hard drive before they traced the nodes. He never even touched the keys. An FBI agent slammed his hand down, handcuffing Isaiah to the leather chair. The metallic click of handcuffs echoing through the penthouse was the precise sound of the Wilson Empire shattering. Isaiah thrashed against the heavy leather armchair, his face pale and slick with sudden sweat. He yanked his restrained wrist against the armrest. The tech genius who boasted about conquering federal firewalls was gone. In his place sat a panicked boy staring down the barrel of a 20-year federal sentence. I did not do this on my own, Isaiah shrieked, pointing his trembling hand across the room. She made me do it. It was her idea. He pointed directly at his mother. Beatrice recoiled as if physically struck her mouth, dropping open in genuine shock as her golden child threw her to the wolves. She ordered the hack, Isaiah babbled, words spilling out in a desperate rush. She threatened to cut off my trust fund if I did not crack the drive. I just do what she says. She is the mastermind. You have to arrest her, not me, you ungrateful little rat. Beatrice hissed, her aristocratic composure dissolving into venomous rage. I gave you everything. The sudden evaporation of their family loyalty was spectacular. Yet the absolute second the threat of a federal prison cell materialized, they turned into feral animals willing to cannibalize each other for a reduced sentence. Stephanie backed away from the marble-wet bar, eyes wide with terror as she looked at the two FBI agents. She dropped her newly purchased designer bags, suddenly realizing those purchases were made with stolen funds. Her gaze darted frantically until it locked onto Richard. I had nothing to do with the real estate fraud, Stephanie screamed, stepping away from her brother. Richard forged the deed. He bragged about paying off a corrupt notary to sign over Audrey's Beacon Hill property into a shell company under my name. He said he was leaving her homeless. I told him it was illegal. He forced me to hold the assets. Shut your mouth, Stephanie, Richard roared, his face turning purple. You begged for a cut of the property sale to fund your boutique expansion. I did not, she shrieked back, tears of panic streaming down her face. You lied to me. You all lied to me. I am a victim here. I watched the chaos unfold with cold satisfaction. Jonathan Sterling stood beside me, watching the elite Wilson family tear themselves apart with an expression of deep disgust. It took less than 3 minutes for their entire facade of familial devotion to rot away. Beatrice, realizing that her children were actively building the federal case against her with their panicked confessions, decided to deploy her own ultimate weapon. The matriarch clutched her chest with both hands. Her eyes rolled back dramatically. She let out a loud, theatrical gasp for air, her knees buckling as she slumped heavily against the side of the white leather sectional. My heart. Beatrice wheezed, her voice a fragile whisper. I cannot breathe. The stress of these lies. I am having a heart attack. Richard, call an ambulance. Richard stepped forward, genuine panic registering on his face, but an armed security contractor immediately blocked his path. I stood perfectly still, watching Beatrice put on the performance of a lifetime. She clutched the fabric of her expensive dress, playing the fragile, victimized elderly woman perfectly. It was the exact routine she used to escape accountability. I slowly reached into my pocket, pulling out my encrypted federal radio. I pressed the transmission button. Medical team, you are clear to enter, I said calmly. The heavy mahogany doors swung open again. 4 paramedics fully equipped with emergency medical gear and an automated external defibrillator marched into the penthouse suite. They moved with calculated efficiency, stepping over the shattered champagne glass and walking directly toward the supposedly dying matriarch. Beatrice froze. She looked at the paramedics, then looked up at me, her fake wheezing abruptly stopping. Did you honestly think I would not anticipate the fragile old woman routine, Beatrice? I asked, my voice echoing through the silent room. I have profiled hundreds of white-collar criminals. The fake medical emergency is chapter 1 in the playbook. I had a federal medical unit stationed in the service elevator an hour before we breached. They are going to check your vitals. When they confirm your heart is functioning perfectly, you are going to stand up, put your hands behind your back, and walk out of this building in federal custody. There is no escaping this. Beatrice slowly lowered her hands from her chest. The color rushed back into her face, replaced by a look of profound, defeated humiliation. She realized that I was always 10 steps ahead of her. Richard stood completely alone in the center of the room. His mother was surrounded by paramedics. His brother was handcuffed to a chair. His sister was weeping in a corner, begging an FBI agent for an immunity deal. His entire fabricated empire was gone. The $10 million loan was a trap. His offshore wealth was a federal mirage. His freedom was over. He looked at me. The arrogant billionaire facade melted away, leaving behind a pathetic, terrified man who had just lost absolutely everything. His knees buckled. Richard dropped heavily to the marble floor, the sharp impact echoing loudly. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, ignoring the security contractors, and grabbed the hem of my suit jacket. Audrey, please. Richard sobbed, tears streaming down his face as he looked up at me with wild, desperate eyes. I am begging you to show mercy. Please, you cannot let them do this. I am your husband. We built a life together. I was confused. Sydney meant nothing to me. I love you. I have always loved you. You have to call them off. We can fix this. We can go back home. Think about Leo. You cannot send the father of your child to federal prison. Please, Audrey, for our family. Richard's desperate grip on my tailored jacket felt like the grasp of a drowning man trying to pull his rescuer under the water. I looked down at him, my expression devoid of any remaining warmth or sympathy. The man who had spent years belittling my intelligence, mocking my wardrobe, and treating me like a disposable asset, was now reduced to a puddle of tears on his own imported marble floor. I did not feel pity. I felt absolute crystalline clarity. I ripped my jacket away from his trembling fingers with a sharp, violent motion that sent him sprawling backward onto the rug. For Leo's sake, I repeated, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register that made the armed security contractors shift uncomfortably. You have the absolute audacity to invoke the name of the son you tried to use as a bargaining chip to steal my house. You told me you would take full custody and leave me destitute on the street if I did not sign over the deed. You used our child as a weapon to fund your corporate fraud, Richard. Do not ever speak his name to me again. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers, the sharp sound cutting through the heavy tension of the room. Diane Hopkins, the most ruthless and expensive divorce attorney on the East Coast, stepped smoothly out of the shadows of the entryway. She wore a tailored crimson suit and carried a sleek leather briefcase, looking like a predator smelling blood in the water. Diane did not even glance at the paramedics attending to Beatrice or the federal agents holding Isaiah. Her eyes were locked entirely on Richard. My husband scrambled backward, his tear-stained face twisting into a mask of pure confusion as Diane walked to my side. He recognized her immediately. Every wealthy man in this city knew Diane Hopkins by reputation alone. She was the lawyer who stripped arrogant billionaires of their assets and left them with nothing but their pride. Diane opened her briefcase with a crisp metallic click and withdrew a thick manila envelope, handing it directly to me. I took the envelope and tossed it onto the glass coffee table. It landed right next to Isaiah's confiscated laptop with a heavy thud. "Go ahead, Richard," I ordered, gesturing toward the envelope. "Open it. Consider it an early divorce settlement." Richard stared at the envelope as if it were a live explosive. His hands shook violently as he reached out and tore open the seal. A stack of federal deposition transcripts slid out bearing the official seal of the Department of Justice. He pulled the first page toward him, his eyes scanning the bold text at the top. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a polished corpse. "That is the sworn, notarized testimony of your mistress," I explained, watching his reality shatter piece by piece. Sydney was incredibly cooperative once the Bureau explained the mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines for wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. "It turns out her loyalty to you was entirely dependent on your bank account." The absolute second I sat across from her in a federal interrogation room and offered her blanket immunity from the corporate fraud charges she flipped. She did not even hesitate, Richard. She gave us everything. She handed over the offshore account routing numbers, the passwords to your hidden ledgers, and the exact dates you forged the board signatures to authorize the fake real estate transfers. She even provided us with the encrypted text messages where you explicitly outlined your plan to drain my personal accounts and leave me bankrupt. Richard dropped the transcripts onto the floor. The papers scattered across the marble, a documented history of his lies, his arrogance, and his ultimate undoing. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. He was experiencing the terrifying, suffocating realization that he possessed absolutely no leverage. His money was seized, his accomplices were turning on him, his mother was faking a medical emergency just to avoid looking him in the eye. His brilliant younger brother was handcuffed to a chair, sobbing quietly. He had no allies left in the world. He was a king without a kingdom, standing in a castle that was actively burning to the ground. Diane Hopkins leaned forward, her voice dripping with professional malice. "The divorce papers are already filed, Richard. Given the federal indictments, the frozen assets, and the documented evidence of your attempt to defraud your wife, you will be walking away from this marriage with exactly nothing. You have lost your company, your freedom, and your family in a single afternoon." I watched Richard process this absolute annihilation. He simply stared at the floor, utterly broken. But the Wilson family delusion ran deep, and the toxicity was not limited to just Richard, Stephanie, Isaiah, and Beatrice. Connor, Richard's arrogant nephew, who had been promised an executive vice president role and a massive financial signing bonus from today's fraudulent summit, had been standing quietly by the wet bar, watching his unearned future evaporate into thin air. Connor had spent his entire life riding the coattails of the Wilson name, believing he was completely untouchable, simply because of his bloodline. The sudden realization that there would be no luxury yachts, no private penthouses, and absolutely no massive trust funds finally snapped his fragile grip on reality. His face contorted into a horrifying mask of pure, unhinged fury. His dark eyes locked directly onto me, filled with a blind, violently entitled rage that entirely overrode any basic human survival instinct. "You completely ruined my entire life," Connor screamed, his voice cracking with hysterical, uncontrollable anger. He violently shoved past a stunned federal agent, kicking the shattered glass coffee table out of his way with a terrifying crash. He lowered his shoulder and charged directly at me, his heavy fists clenched completely, ignoring the 4 heavily armed security contractors standing firmly between us right now. Connor covered the distance with the reckless momentum of a man who had never once faced a single physical consequence in his entire life. His fists were raised, his face twisted in a snarl of pure entitlement, but he never even made it within 3 feet of me. The two federal agents intercepted his path. The lead agent executed a flawless tactical takedown, driving a shoulder directly into his chest. The impact lifted Connor completely off his feet. He crashed down onto the imported marble floor with a bone-jarring thud that echoed. The air rushed out of his lungs in a pathetic, wheezing gasp. Before he could even fully comprehend the pain, the second agent dropped a heavy knee squarely between his shoulder blades, pinning him flush against the stone. The sharp metallic ratcheting of steel handcuffs snapping tightly around his wrists signaled the absolute end of his violent tantrum. "Get off me!" Connor shrieked, squirming uselessly beneath the federal agent. "Do you know who I am? You cannot do this. I am a Wilson. My father will sue the entire federal government. You are ruining my career." I stood directly above him. Looking down at the golden child, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. His arrogance was instantly replaced by pathetic whimpering. "You ruined your own career the moment you willingly signed your name as a shadow director on those fraudulent shell corporations," I stated. "You thought you were inheriting an empire, but you were inheriting federal racketeering charges." Connor looked up at me, tears of terror streaming down his face. He struggled against the steel cuffs, his cheek pressed awkwardly against the marble. "Do you remember that afternoon in the private school parking lot, Connor?" I asked, leaning down. "You blocked my car with your imported sports car. You laughed in my face. You told me that people like me were born to serve people like you. You boasted that your family was untouchable." Connor squeezed his eyes shut, sobbing openly now. I reached out and adjusted the cuffs of my tailored suit. "You are right, Connor," I said softly. "Someone is going to prison today, but it is not me." The lead agent hauled Connor to his feet. Across the room, the rest of the Wilson family was being systematically processed. Isaiah was hyperventilating into his chest. Stephanie was arguing with an agent demanding to call her stylist before they took her mugshot. Beatrice sat in the corner, cleared medically, leaving her to face the reality of a perp walk in her designer gown. Richard simply stared blankly at the wall, finally understanding his reality had collapsed. "Lead them out," I ordered. The federal agents formed a tight perimeter around the 5 Wilsons. We marched them toward the private elevators. The descent was completely silent, save for her panicked sobbing. They were trapped in a descending steel box, entirely stripped of their power, their wealth, and their dignity. When the elevator doors finally slid open on the ground floor, the true weight of their destruction materialized. The grand lobby of the luxury hotel was not empty. The sprawling marble atrium and adjacent dining room were packed to maximum capacity, with the exact people the Wilsons had spent their entire lives trying to impress. Country club board members, rival corporate executives, socialites, and wealth managers all turned their heads simultaneously. The visual was devastating. Richard Wilson, the supposed titan of industry, was marched through the lobby in federal handcuffs. Beatrice, the self-proclaimed queen of Boston high society, was flanked by armed agents, her mascara running. Isaiah and Connor stumbled along like frightened children. The reaction from this crowd was instantaneous. The clinking of silver forks against fine china stopped entirely. The polite hum of wealthy conversation died. People stood up from their tables. Smartphones were immediately raised, capturing the absolute degradation of the Wilson family perfectly. Stephanie tried to hide her face behind bound hands, weeping loudly as a prominent socialite she had recently insulted openly laughed. Richard kept his eyes glued to the floor, his face burning with unbearable shame. They were forced to walk the entire length of the massive lobby, running a gauntlet of whispers and flashing cameras. Decades of manufactured prestige evaporated. They were a cautionary tale. The heavy glass doors slid open. A line of black federal vehicles and local police cruisers sat idling at the curb, their emergency lights flashing rhythmically against the pristine glass facade. The agents systematically loaded the Wilsons into the back seats. Richard looked back at me one final time through the reinforced glass. There was no defiance left, only the crushing realization that he had underestimated the wrong woman. I stood on the curb, the warm breeze tugging at my suit, and watched the line of police cruisers pull away from the hotel, merging into the heavy city traffic until they disappeared entirely from view. Jonathan Sterling stepped up beside me, his hands resting casually in his pockets. He watched the cars vanish with a look of profound satisfaction. An exceptionally clean operation, lead investigator Sterling said, his deep voice carrying a note of genuine respect. I turned to the CEO of Summit Financial, and the personal funds. Sterling smiled, pulling a sleek tablet from his jacket pocket. He tapped the screen twice and held it out to me. The fraud department flagged and reversed the unauthorized wire transfer 30 minutes ago. The $50,000 has been fully restored to your private accounts. Every single asset Richard attempted to steal has been frozen. He died a broke man today. I looked at the glowing green numbers on the screen. The financial chains that had bound me to the Wilson family were officially broken. The deep, suffocating weight that had rested on my chest for years completely vanished. I looked up at the towering glass facade of the luxury hotel, and I finally took a deep, unrestrained breath. The long nightmare was officially over forever. 3 months later, the spectacular collapse of the Wilson family empire was fully complete. The federal indictments had moved with a swift, merciless efficiency that left Boston high society utterly paralyzed. The dominoes fell exactly as I had engineered them, and the resulting destruction was a masterclass in absolute ruin. The first domino to fall was Beatrice's beloved country club mansion. For decades, that sprawling estate had served as the ultimate symbol of her unearned superiority. A fortress where she hosted elite galas, funded entirely by stolen money. I stood across the street on a crisp Tuesday morning, holding a cup of black coffee, and watched the Internal Revenue Service systematically dismantle her fabricated kingdom. Federal agents carried out boxes of seized financial documents, priceless stolen artwork, and counterfeit antiques. A heavy wooden sign was driven into her pristine, manicured front lawn, bearing the bold red letters of a federal property auction. Beatrice was currently sitting in a sterile holding cell, completely stripped of her designer gowns, and her toxic arrogance awaiting a trial that would undoubtedly end in a federal conviction. Her precious socialite friends had abandoned her the instant the handcuffs clicked. The second domino was the bail hearing. I sat in the back row of the federal courthouse wearing a sharp charcoal suit and watched Richard and Isaiah get led into the room. They wore matching bright orange jumpsuits, their wrists and ankles bound by heavy metal chains. The golden boys of the Wilson dynasty looked hollow, pale, and thoroughly defeated. The federal prosecutor laid out a mountain of irrefutable evidence presenting the mirrored hard drives, the forged property deeds, and the offshore routing numbers. The judge did not even hesitate. She looked down at Richard and Isaiah with profound disgust, labeling them a severe flight risk and an immediate danger to the financial community. Bail was emphatically denied. The sound of the judge's gavel striking the wooden block echoed through the cavernous courtroom like a final fatal heartbeat. They were remanded directly to federal custody, facing a mandatory minimum of 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary for wire fraud, racketeering, and international money laundering. Richard turned his head to look at me as the bailiffs dragged him away. I did not blink. I simply offered him a cold, unwavering stare, letting him absorb the absolute permanence of his cage. Stephanie experienced a different yet equally poetic brand of destruction. She had spent her entire adult life treating service workers like disposable trash, surviving purely on the dirty money funneled through her husband's fraudulent accounts. When the federal government seized all of those illicit assets and her husband filed for bankruptcy to avoid a steeper prison sentence, Stephanie was forced into the one place she feared most, the real world. I drove past a local fast food restaurant on the edge of town, specifically to witness her new reality. Through the grease-stained drive-through window, I saw Stephanie wearing a cheap, ill-fitting polyester uniform and a plastic visor. Her perfectly contoured face was shiny with sweat. She was frantically punching buttons on a cash register, her hands trembling as a frustrated customer yelled at her about a missing side of fries. There were no designer bags to hide behind, no stolen wealth to shield her from consequence. She was forced to actually work handling sticky coins and bagging greasy food for minimum wage. It was the ultimate necessary humbling of a woman who had never earned a single dollar in her life. Meanwhile, my own life was completely restored. I sat in the luxurious corner office of Diane Hopkins' Sunlight, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and signed the final page of my divorce decree. The settlement was an absolute bloodbath for the Wilson family. Diane had leveraged the federal indictments and the undeniable proof of Richard's attempted fraud to strip him of everything. I successfully reclaimed full, undisputed ownership of the Beacon Hill house and every single cent of my personal assets. More importantly, I was granted 100% sole physical and legal custody of Leo. Richard was stripped of all parental rights deemed a danger to his own child by the family court judge. I walked out of Diane's office with a profound sense of freedom. The parasitic weight of the Wilson family was entirely gone. My son was safe, my finances were secure, and my career at the Bureau was thriving. There was only one final thread left to sever. I walked into the sterile, echoing visiting room of the Federal Detention Center. The air smelled of bleach and despair. I sat down in the hard plastic chair and waited. A heavy steel door buzzed open, and a guard escorted Richard into the cramped booth on the opposite side of the thick, reinforced glass. He picked up the black telephone receiver, his hands shaking violently. His eyes were red-sunken and filled with a desperate, pathetic hope that I had come to save him. I picked up my receiver, holding my gaze steady. I did not say a word. I simply reached into my briefcase, pulled out the final, irrevocable custody papers bearing the judge's official seal, and slid them into the narrow metal slot beneath the glass. Richard looked down at the documents, the color draining from his face as he read the bold print terminating his parental rights forever. He slammed his hand against the glass, sobbing uncontrollably, begging me to reconsider, promising he would change, pleading for one more chance to be a family. I looked at the broken man rotting behind the thick glass. I placed the black receiver back onto the metal hook. I turned around without a single ounce of regret and walked out of the bleak prison. Stepping out into the bright, beautiful, and endlessly warm sunlight, I took a deep breath. The crisp morning air tasted sweet. I was ready to go home and fully embrace our new, completely peaceful beginning. The warm spring sunlight washed over the wooden bleachers of the middle school gymnasium, casting long golden rays across the polished hardwood floor. I sat in the third row, breathing in the scent of floor wax and freshly printed presentation boards. Children rushed past me with cardboard volcanoes and wired circuits, their voices echoing with pure, unfiltered joy. For the very first time in over a decade, I felt completely weightless. The heavy, suffocating dread that had defined my marriage was officially gone. I crossed my legs, leaning back against the wooden bench, and allowed myself a genuine, unrestrained smile. Just 3 months ago, I was standing inside a sterile federal prison visitation room, watching Richard shatter behind a wall of reinforced glass. Today, I was sitting in the vibrant heart of this beautiful new life. The contrast was staggering. Richard and his elitist relatives had spent years treating me like an invisible, disposable object. They looked at me and saw nothing but a quiet, naive bookkeeper they could manipulate and discard whenever it suited their deeply greedy agendas. They built an empire of lies and arrogance, assuming I would simply bow my head and accept my assigned destruction quietly. They were devastatingly wrong. I watched a group of parents chatting near the entrance, their relaxed postures a stark reminder of the completely normal life I had finally secured. My journey from a marginalized wife to the architect of their total annihilation played out in my mind like a perfectly directed film. I did not just survive their coordinated attack, I meticulously dismantled their entire dynasty from the inside out. I seized their offshore accounts, exposed their fraudulent shell companies, and handed their stolen legacy directly to the federal authorities on a silver platter with a very sweet, satisfied smile. Every late night I spent reviewing their encrypted ledgers, every silent moment I endured their condescending insults, and every tear I shed over their vile betrayals had served a distinct purpose. They thought my silence was a symptom of weakness. They never realized it was the disciplined focus of a woman gathering heavy ammunition. I weaponized their own unearned arrogance against them. Beatrice lost her beloved country club mansion to an aggressive federal seizure. Stephanie was humiliated into working a minimum-wage retail job. Richard and Isaiah were currently staring down 20 miserable years in a maximum-security federal penitentiary. Their family name, once a symbol of untouchable wealth and terrifying power in Boston, was now synonymous with disgrace and corporate corruption. Their high society friends erased their phone numbers. Their country club associates pretended they had never met them. They were entirely eradicated from the elite circles they had worshipped. Sitting in the sunlit bleachers, I felt a deep, resonant wave of pure satisfaction. The Federal Fraud Department had restored every single dollar to my private accounts. My Beacon Hill home was completely mine. I had reclaimed my financial independence, my personal dignity, and my absolute and everlasting freedom. Suddenly, the heavy gymnasium doors swung open, and the science fair participants began filing onto the floor. My eyes scanned the crowd of eager students searching for one specific face. There he was. Leo walked proudly toward the center of the court wearing a crisp white shirt and a bright smile. He carried a complex, meticulously constructed solar energy model we had spent the last 3 weekends building together in our safe, quiet living room. His dark eyes darted across the massive bleachers, searching the crowded room with an anxious energy until his gaze finally locked directly onto my face. His expression lit up with an incandescent joy that made my heart ache in the most beautiful way possible. "Mom," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaotic noise of the gymnasium. He broke into a dead sprint, abandoning his careful walking pace. He ran toward the bleachers with an unburdened, vibrant energy I had not seen in him since he was a toddler. Clutched tightly in his right fist was a shimmering first-place blue ribbon. He scaled the wooden steps 2 at a time, throwing his arms around my neck in a fierce, breathless, tightly crushing bear hug. I wrapped my arms around his small frame, pulling him tightly against my chest. I buried my face in his soft hair, breathing in the scent of his shampoo. "We won," he whispered excitedly against my shoulder, pulling back just enough to proudly display the shiny blue ribbon. "You did it, Leo," I replied, my voice thick with happy tears. "I am so incredibly proud of you." Looking at his bright, hopeful face, the ultimate victory of my long, brutal war finally solidified. He was physically safe. He was truly happy. He was completely free from their highly toxic shadow. Richard would never manipulate him again. Beatrice would never belittle him. The generational curse of their narcissistic greed had been permanently severed. Leo would grow up knowing the absolute value of hard work, pure honesty, and genuine love. He would never be treated as a disposable pawn in a twisted corporate chess game. I stood up from the wooden bleachers, keeping one arm securely wrapped around my young child. I looked out over the crowded, noisy gymnasium, feeling a profound sense of final closure. The terrifying nightmare was permanently over. The heavy dust had gracefully settled. I had clearly won. I was the only one left standing. I turned my gaze away from the massive crowd and looked directly forward, staring right into the lens of the metaphorical camera. My voice was steady, calm, and laced with absolute, unbreakable power. They thought they could steal my money, my home, and my child, because I was just a quiet bookkeeper. They forgot that the people who keep the books are the ones who know exactly where all the skeletons are buried. Never underestimate the woman sitting quietly at the back of the room. We walked forward toward our beautiful new dawn.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my father's endless love.